Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hey folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Been a week since we last had a wee chat, and as usual, lots been going on, albeit one main topic, as you all know. But just a few things before we get started. The old usual, if you haven't already subscribed, please do. And if you like the show, don't forget to hit the like button, because this is, I've got to thank you all, because our show is growing in numbers every week, and we had a record week last week for the last week's show. And for any of you who are watching the live show on the Sunday, I did notice that we were getting, as I put it, some cuckoos in the nest. Other people, it's not just the unionist press that are listening into us just now, but all sorts of others. And someone said, "Oh, you mustn't talk about GRR anymore, the bill, or I won't watch again." And as I said to that gentleman, "Well, just you send me an email with what you would like us, and we'll talk about that, especially for you, and we'll not talk about anything that you don't like." We will talk, it's a review programme, and we'll talk about what there is to be reviewed. And that's exactly what we're going to do today. I am, as I said to you last week, I am in Dubai. And I've got to just share a story. Not only are we having record numbers on Through a Scottish Prism, I was at a rugby tournament this morning in Dubai. And a guy came up to me, a Scots lad, came up to me and said, "How you doing, Roddy?" And I thought, I must have met him last time or one of the times when I was here. And he said, "Are you doing a podcast this weekend?" So yeah, go. We reached the four parts of the earth. And then, having said that, we're now going to go to North Dakota, where our Phil, Mr. Boswell, the Coatbridge Cavalier, joins us. No Stetson, no six shooters, no Spurs.
No, it's just the usual. It is about 6 foot of snow outside, right enough, and it's dropping down to minus 30 with a wind chill that takes it even below. So it's a harsh weather warning coming up. So it's turning really, really nasty here. So
I should say it's slightly warmer in Dubai in the desert.
I can imagine. I wish I was there.
And right, we'll get a weather update. See, we give you weather and everything in this show, folks. We're from all the parts of the world. You don't need to watch these weather programmes. Up there in Clackmannanshire, Eva, my friend, how's the weather in Clackmannanshire?
It was actually nice and mild yesterday, Roddy. I was out in the garden for a while, first time for ages, in the greenhouse too, and then I had to drag myself back in to watch the telly and see how hot it's getting for my local MSP, the Justice Minister. So all in all, a busy week.
It's been a heck of a week, and to make up the team, we can't do it without our Dr. Yvonne Ridley down there in the borders. Hey, Yvonne, how are you?
Yes, I'm great. I'm in a nail bar in Selkirk. So if you're wondering about the exotic surroundings, not as exotic as yours or Phil's, but yes. And earlier this week, I was at Butte House, not inside, on the outside, shouting in and calling for Miss Sturgeon's resignation. And I think
as we say in Barhead, good shout.
Prophetic.
Yeah. Because it is the only show in town, Phil. And this week, our GRRB and all the things that are associated with GRA went a step further. And I won't use these female names that the mainstream media are using, or the BBC. A guy called Adam Graham, who decided he was going to call himself a woman, was sentenced for 2 rapes and declared himself a woman and was going to get sent to Cornton Vale, a women's prison, a rapist in a women's prison. It's a load of nonsense, Phil.
It is. It's ridiculous and it's dangerous. And obviously, big shout out to all the women that have stood up and those of us who've stood up against this. And it's turning round. Eventually, we're getting our way and people are seeing sense. And Nicola's been brought to task on this. But all of the above, all of the above issues are perfectly depicted in Susan Dolgetti's article in The Scotsman. Check out the online version. She cites that this should be the end of Nicola's controversial and let's face it, it's fundamentally flawed, as we've been saying since it came out, policy on self-ID, something the Scottish people did not vote for because it wasn't in the manifesto. The line that gets me, though, is double rapist Adam Graham, and I too won't call him by his name, his preferred name, would be removed from Scotland's all-female prison immediately. How stupid have you got to be, Nicola, to see that this was an absolute travesty, to go down this route in the first place, and then in your arrogant ignorance, as entirely within character, I would add, to seek to blame others. For me, we see the stark and blatantly obvious contrast of the reasoned, balanced voice and opinion of Maren Smith from Women's Scotland, who reiterates our points and the points that most sensible people have been saying, that all we wanted all along was an honest debate and to hear all sides. As we knew, as Maren does, this self-ID is not wanted by the people of Scotland and would be defeated in a fair debate. Mariman also, she went on to say in her interview outside the Scottish Parliament, again, what we've been saying, freedom of speech matters. All should be heard. And she stated expressly, including in this case, Nicola and her ideologically possessed rabble. But that was never going to happen in Nicola's watch, which is why she has to go, Roddy.
I agree with you. I mean, we have, as you go, an open invitation here to anyone who believes in the GRRB bill to come on here and state their case, and we'll have a debate, open debate, you know, but no one steps forward, surprisingly enough, Phil, and I was accused of being a homophobe for inviting them on recently. Bizarre. Eva, my friend, you, as they say in the BBC and the other places, sources have told me that you might have some information to share with us about the Cornton Vale incarceration of Mr. Adam Graham.
Yeah, it seems to be the case that when a prisoner is to be remanded, the presiding judge has to sign a warrant authorising the imprisonment in a particular place of that prisoner. So the warrant has to contain details including formal stuff like the prisoner's actual name, date of birth, offence of which convicted, dates when they'll be back at court and what have you. And it must also include the name of the penal establishment to which the prisoner is to be transported. What is emerging is a picture strongly suggestive of at least confusion, if not downright interference, by people within the higher echelons of the Scottish Government. And I think that this speculation, which was outlined magnificently in the Telegraph yesterday, is something that the Cabinet Secretary for Justice, Keith Brown, and also Miss Sturgeon as First Minister need to put to bed ASAP, because what the Telegraph reported was that the prisoner was destined to go to Barlinnie, and that will have been and can only have been because a judge signed a warrant specifying Barlinnie. If I'm wrong, I'm happy to stand corrected. However, apparently the transport was on its way to Barlinnie with the prisoner, and instructions came that the prisoner was to be rerouted to Cornton Vale. I understand that this did not go down well with various people in Cornton Vale, and I would be interested to hear from more people involved in the court service, the prison transport, and the prison service, as well as from other female prisoners who've been affected by this. I understand that the unit to which this prisoner was allocated was a special unit, which you might call segregated, but it's actually a place for vulnerable women who are vulnerable because of their behaviour or their mental health or perhaps a pregnancy or the like. So to think that a rapist took up that post at all, but was there for several days, is, I think, a career-ending event of immense embarrassment, given that it's been reported internationally. So that's some of the inside information that seems to have been leaked. And I think that it needs to be addressed by the Scottish Government, and they should be confirming when the warrant was signed, who signed the warrant, and whether or not the original warrant specified Cornton Vale or somewhere else. And if the original warrant did not specify Corrington Vale, more questions, and those questions need to be answered honestly, directly, and without the characteristic clever words that the First Minister likes to use. So she said she didn't formally intervene, so did somebody on her behalf in her department or one of her ministerial colleagues intervene informally. The jury's out and we need an answer.
Yeah, it's last week. Advocate John Moyer said to us, Yvonne, that when this, as Miss Sturgeon referred to, a robust assessment's made, he informed us that part of that it's for the safety of the convicted prisoner. But I'm thinking if he'd gone to Berlin, there was that I've forgotten his first name, Mr. Boyle, a famous murderer who was kept in the special units in Berlin. If there was any danger for Mr. Adam Graham, surely he could have been kept in that place in Berlin, which was the special unit, I think it was referred to in Berlin. He'd have been quite safe in there.
Well, quite frankly, I don't care where he's held as long as it's not in a woman's prison. And Eva was saying, this is a resigning issue. Well, it's either a resigning issue for the Justice Minister, who spent all day on Thursday defending the decision to put this creature into the woman's prison, or if it's not Keith Brown's responsibility, then it's a resigning issue for Nicola Sturgeon, who spent 24 hours later on every news channel you can think of saying that it was right that this double rapist was not put in a woman's prison. And if she truly believes that, then the SNP mantra of trans women are women no longer holds true, which turns upside down all of her so-called progressive policies. The SNP is imploding. There are fractures and cracks and fissures which will emerge, I think, over the coming week. And I'd be surprised if next week's subject is, who do we get after Nicola? Because she can't survive this one.
Well, I don't know about that, Phil. As Yvonne's alluded to, at First Minister's question, and also what Eva has alluded to, I'll say this for Nicola Sturgeon, she's allows you to get an independence, allows you to run in education, health, transport, police and justice, but she's very good at presentation skills. And at First Minister's question, she made out as if this is a big surprise to her, that there was such a thing as men in women's prisons. And in fact, at the moment, I'm led to believe, and Eva can correct me if I'm wrong, but there's something like 16 trans prisoners in the different estates in Scottish prisons. But she was saying, it was beaten out as if it was unusual, and it was the Scottish Prison Service decision on their own, or the Justice Service, was anyone ever, but she was throwing people left, right, and centre under the bus. We've seen this trick by her so often, can't remember, don't recall, wasn't me, a big boy did it and run away, blame Alba. It's just getting a bit monotonous. You're on mute, my friend.
Yeah, I'll let Eva and Yvonne speak more on this because they've done much, much more work and contributed more to this closing in on a win here than I have. But certainly, this is Nicola's modus operandi, throwing people under buses. We saw this, and to hear her blame everyone else, it wasn't me. I don't know. I can't remember. I don't recall. Where have we heard that before? Every time she's put in the spotlight, she deflects. She diverts attention to someone else, blames someone else, or throws someone under a bus. And this started right at the very start. Right at the very start, when we were down at Westminster, I was looking at it and thinking about when I saw what was happening, and it just reminded me of early 2015 when, first of all, there was the Natalie McGarry issue, and there was no hesitation in throwing Natalie under a bus on 2 counts. Now, obviously, that turned out very badly for Natalie. But then there was Lisa Cameron, was thrown under the bus for by Nicola, abandoned. Then Michelle Thompson. Then it was my turn. So I know a lot of people who, from the very start, are acutely aware, and you just go back and read the papers. People forget about it. Most of us forget about these things. But at the time, when you're out there trying to fight for independence, like all of these people that were named were in it for independence. That's what we went down to Westminster for. And to find yourself abandoned and not supported, because it was all about protecting Nicola's reputation and precious Nicola, that it was her reputation that mattered, not your life, career, family life, or anything, or any principled matter. So it doesn't surprise me at all that this has happened, because it's been like this since the start, folks.
Yeah, but Eva, while she was making out it was everyone's fault but hers, the reality is twofold. One, the MSPs were whipped to go through the lobbies to back her GRRB bill, and also that they were whipped to prevent the amendment by Mr. Finlay, the Tory MSP, about rapists not being allowed to do it. So to pretend that she wasn't aware of any of this kind of thing, or these people would end up, it's just a lie. There's no other way of putting it. It's not I misspoke. It's a lie. She lied in Parliament.
I'll be very careful here deliberately. The First Minister knows, as a former lawyer, that what you're not supposed to do in law is to cherry pick evidence. But it seems to me that in all of her different speeches and interviews in relation to gender reform and that entire agenda, including in relation to prisons in this week, what the First Minister has repeatedly done is to cherry pick. So you can call that lying. I would call it something other than that. I would include the words willful blindness. And I would ask everybody to remember that it was James Morton of the Scottish Trans Alliance who first wrote that the deliberate strategy was to get people used to the idea of what he would call trans women being in prisons, because they could then embed that policy throughout all public policy. Mm-hmm. So that was several years ago, 2017, 18 or so, it was first reported. But Murray Blackburn Mackenzie, 4women.scot, Keep Prisons Single Sex, Soul Sisters, Scottish Feminist Network, innumerable organisations of feminists have written often about what has in fact been occurring in Scottish prisons for several years. One of the very first trans-identifying males in a women's prison was there decades ago. But in recent years, we've had the Katie Dolitovsky issue. I was at the protest outside Cornton Vale in November last year when Katie Dolitovsky was there. Katie is male. Katie is 6'5", 6'5", and Katie was in prison in Poland, having been convicted of sex offences. Katie is a registered sex offender. While Katie was in a male part of the prison in Poland, Katie was accused of having assaulted another male prisoner, and Katie was then let out of prison to await trial in relation to that assault. When at liberty, Katie moved from home in Fife without telling the authorities and went to live in a women's aid refuge in the north of England, where Katie remained for several weeks. Katie was then arrested when he came back to Fife, and he appeared in court and was remanded in custody in relation to having left his address without permission and in relation to the trial for the assault on the prisoner while he was in Polmont. So Katie's period on remand was served in November 2022 in Cornton Vale. Keith Brown knew that, the First Minister knew that, but it did not get the publicity that you're seeing now, and it should have. At the protest, one of the women brought along a cardboard cutout of what a 6'5" man of Katie Dolitovsky's build would look like. And the cardboard cutout, which you'll find very readily on Twitter, has lines drawn across it to represent the height and the size of the children who were Katie Dolitovsky's victims, and the average height and build of the female prisoners and the female prisoner officers within Cornton Vale. That is a disgrace. It ought not to have happened. There are very many other men who have been in or are trying to get into the women's estate, and there are others where at the moment it's the talk of the wing in areas where only sex offenders are housed. They're all talking about what they can do to get into the women's estate because it's been made so very easy for them. And it's easy now before self-ID is the law in the context of getting a GRC. And that's a fly move, which I'm sure we'll come back on to later. But it's one of the reasons why you have to be very careful when you listen to guarantees and promises that are given by politicians, and you have to look at the bigger picture, not something such as the GRR bill in isolation.
Correct, absolutely. Yvonne, one of the other things, the wonderful Joanna Cherry put out a tweet, and she was right. The Scottish Prison Service was targeted and chosen by these trans zealots because they thought, and you know, the sad thing is probably true, no one would give a shit because it was female convicts. Sort of, you know, who cares? It's not happening in Morningside or Kelvinside. It's just bloody prisoners in a women's prison. And it was nastily and specifically chosen as a ground to see how far they could get, or am I just being a cynic?
No, I believe that these vulnerable women were chosen because people won't care, because they're women who have been convicted and sentenced to prison, and who's going to be up in arms about it? I can understand why Eva is dancing around not wanting to call Sturgeon a liar. Obviously, as a lawyer, she's fully aware of the law. I'm not a lawyer, and I would say that Holyrood is full of liars. And all of those that have spent the last year chanting trans women are women have lied, because clearly trans women aren't women. Otherwise, this Adam character would now be in Cornton Vale prison, getting up to God knows what. Now, Eva might be able to shed light on this, but I know that there's another story that's erupting at the moment about somebody who makes this double rapist look a bit like a Tupperware agent, who is already in the women's prison service. So,
are you referring to Andrew Burns?
Well, I haven't read the stories, but I can tell that there's a major one brewing, and I think that the Sunday papers will be full of it now, about this latest trans woman. Let's call it what it is. It's a man in a dress, and in fact, in this double rapist's case, there were some lurid pictures of him in jogging bottoms, and quite clearly he has a penis and was very happy for the world to see it. Otherwise, he wouldn't have worn his clothes in such a way. And this is the trouble with some of these trans women. They have this fetish where they need to show, putting it crudely, their meat and two veg to the whole of the world, while posing as women. Mm. These people are just, well, we're at, you know, I'm thinking of watersheds at the moment, but this is Nicola Sturgeon has now been hoisted by her own petard. And in fact, maybe Phil will be able to shed some light on this. Because of her mantra, trans women are women, when quite clearly they're not, hasn't she broken some sort of ministerial code? Because she has deliberately misled people listening to what she's had to say, and she's had plenty to say in Holyrood. And I thought that she was bound by some sort of ministerial code where she is supposed to be completely transparent.
Well, Phil, she did a television interview later in the week as well, where she went on and called everyone that was against her gender agenda, for want of a better word, as we were all misogynists, homophobics, racists, no doubt Nazis and God knows what else, but she didn't use the word Nazi, but she did use the words homophobic, racist and misogynist, because we say a trans woman is a man, not a woman. Because a trans man is a woman, not a man. That makes us misogynistic, homophobic, racists. And I don't get the connection.
No, yeah, there is no connection. For me, it's biology, and it's my right. You know, if someone presents to me as an adult, as a human being, I lean towards compassion, and I try to be compassionate and caring to my fellow human beings. And if I can see someone's struggling with something and is brave enough to try and do something and is genuinely struggling with the issue of their trans identity, and they present as a woman to me, even though I'm clearly seeing they're a man, if I think it's genuine and I decide this, no one tells me what pronouns to use or what words to use or how to describe or label someone. I, as an adult human being, make these decisions. And I will err on the side of compassion when I meet someone. But if I see someone abusing this, as these horrors, these evil people clearly are, as we knew they would, as they always have, as they always will, and then Nicola decides to ignore that because that's what she does, and has surrounded herself with these idiots, then you don't get to tell me, you certainly don't get to call me a misogynist or a homophobe or a racist. We should be taking her to court for this. That's libelous. That is. Look at the racist. The latest. There was one case set the precedence in Scotland that I'm pretty familiar with, and it was. Well, I don't know if I should say it. Maybe she doesn't want it said, but no. Well, McAnulty versus McCulloch, with Lord Hughes' decision, set the precedence in false accusations of racism, and this could apply easily to anything Nicola's said. And what Vaughan's saying, maybe I don't know all the details in terms of the rules and regulations about the ministerial code, but breaches abound. And I agree with what Vaughan said earlier. They're all liars anyway, so it doesn't make any difference.
But Eva, the one thing I've noticed, Phil's referred to how people have been thrown under the bus, how she the way she treated her predecessor, all those things. She's the lady's not for turning. Reminds us all of someone else. But it seems as soon as there's a wee bit of pushback from England, because it's been all over. I mean, I don't know, Yvette Cooper and God knows loads of other English members of Parliament and journalists, etc. She crumbles like an ice cube in hell at the very thought of her popularity, and hence she went to Holyrood and said, as if, well, I don't know how this happened. It was nothing to do with me, Gov. She is the classical bully. Or am I again being unfair?
I think we need to.
I give you these difficult ones, Eva. You've got to watch what you say. Eh?
No, I think we need to put this in context. And the context this week in particular has been hugely significant. Remember last Saturday in George Square, and round the corner up at the steps, in Glasgow was the demonstration, which was described as a trans rights demo, where there were objections being made to the Section 35 process. And remember all the photos that were all over the press of the placards being held up, apparently outwit the sight of the SNP, MSPs and MPs who were there. Remember, decapitate TERFs, we eat TERFs, TERF Tory scum, etc. And none of these MPs and MSPs noticed that these placards were there until they were pointed out to them, despite the fact that one of the MPs had her own child on her shoulders and the placard was immediately behind. So they said they hadn't seen these placards. Speeches were made supporting various folk. And then what really took us into, I suppose, the twilight zone, really, except that it's the twilight zone of Scotland these days, was the item produced on Monday jointly between Wings Over Scotland and Glenner in relation to that episode, but an awful lot more detail emerged, including that one of the very major proponents, and I would suspect beneficiaries of the GRR bill, was one Beth Douglas, previously known as Jack Douglas. And Jack had been a student leader in the west of Scotland, but Jack has become Beth now, and Beth is a Green Party activist for trans people. Beth is one of the famous trans people who was in the Scottish Parliament for the debate on the bill, and Beth is so well loved by Scottish politicians that Beth had his photo taken with numerous, including Maggie Chapman, the Green MSP, who is not a stranger to controversy herself. But not only did Beth get her pictures taken, I'm saying her, although I think Beth doesn't have a GRC, but that might be because Beth doesn't actually have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. That might just be because Beth has decided to self-identify as trans. But if we leave that to one side, what was proven by Wings and Glenner was that Beth has a very dodgy background. And Beth was in a video with Alex Cole-Hamilton, the Liberal Democrat leader in Scotland, where Mr. Cole-Hamilton turned to Beth and said, "We did it for you, Beth. We did it for you. In those dark, dank days in Holyrood, we looked up from committee and we looked up from the Parliament and we saw you, Beth, and your friends up there in the public gallery. We did this for you, Beth." Now, for reasons known only to Mr. Cole-Hamilton, and I'm sure that he also has an open invitation to come here and refute this, he apparently has been trying to get his people to get that video removed from YouTube. But unfortunately, of course, the Streisand effect has come into play. And instead of the video being unseen, it's been seen multiple times. So if there's a problem now as regards Mr. Cole-Hamilton's respect for Beth, now would be a good time for him to clarify what that problem is, because the Scotland we see now is not the Scotland that we want to see. You're on mute, Roddy.
This is the same Beth that offers sexual services of the real, but I think Yvonne was talking about it last week. It was, again, watershed time. We couldn't go into some of the things which are absolutely vile. And so Andrew Cole-Hamilton, Cole-Hamilton was doing it for this person. Is this the same person we're talking about?
Absolutely. In fact, I think I said last week that I used to work on the News of the World, and we did a lot of undercover stories on prostitutes or sex workers. And his menu of services, I'd never heard of some of them, and I had to go onto the internet and into the dictionary to find out what on earth he was offering. And you're quite right, Roddy. Some of the services that he's offering clients is absolutely eye-watering. And I just thought, if the News of the World was still on the go, I think a whole host of journalists would have descended on Holyrood to find out if any of these MSPs have been clients of this male prostitute. And Eva's quite right. This Cole-Hamilton character was absolutely glowing in his praise for this Beth Harris, who is the last picture that it put up on Instagram was stroking an axe. Now, what the hell is that about? You know, if you're not a lumberjack, why on earth would you pose with an axe?
But was he not also threatening TERFs?
Well, yes, and those 4 MSPs and MPs who said that they didn't see the sign "Decapitate TERFs." As I said earlier this week, I was outside Bute House, and I said to the crowd that had assembled there, I'm looking round to see who's waving what and who's painting what placard. And everybody started to laugh because they know how ridiculous it is that a politician would go to a demonstration and not notice the placards. It's the first thing you do, because there's some great humour in these political gatherings. So, as I say, Holyrood is full of liars, and in Westminster it's almost compulsory, bearing in mind Boris Johnson and all of his shenanigans.
But you're right. You know, I'll go back to the happiest days of my life, the 2014 referendum. That's exactly what you do. You look round about you to see how much crowds with you and what's been said, and how many saltires, and is it filled up? To say that they didn't see anything full is absolute nonsense.
Yeah, it is. And let's name them. It's Stuart MacDonald, Glasgow South. It's Alison Thewlis for Glasgow Central. It's Kirsten Oswald and Cowbab Stewart. So you were there. You knew what you were doing. There should be even if this was a standalone issue, there should be an unreserved apology for what they did. They know what they did. They can see what they did. And even if they didn't know, they should still apologise. But no, nothing, because they refuse to concede an inch on this madness. And for everybody else, they're cowards. They're cowards. They won't even stand up to this craziness, you know. And then you've got, you know, I know we're going to come on. Look at Hannah Burdell. You know, she wants to go to Strasbourg. I know we're going to talk about this in a bit, but to interfere on the gender reform bill, but not on Indy. She's going all the way. Hannah, of course, who I know, and I'm not at all surprised that she's riding her pink fluffy unicorn dancing on rainbows all the way to Strasbourg to fight for a radical and deeply flawed policy for the ideologically possessed children surrounding Nicola, and one that we've said many times the Scottish people don't want, as everyone's beginning to understand, instead of fighting for our independence. It's time to clear out all of these people, all of these shysters, and completely overhaul the SNP to return it to Salmon's style of SNP, competent, honest, transparent, and fighting for Indy. I mean, there's something even more. There's something darker about all of this, and this is why an apology is not good enough for the likes of the MPs and MSPs we've just listed. It's the childish idiocy that many of us laugh at of this whole issue masks the deeply pernicious nature of this evil that has been done to women and girls by these ideologically possessed children, and a First Minister so arrogant that she ignores and destroys anyone who disagrees with her. Nicola, as I said before regarding the fox hunting story in that Westminster Hall debate, where she held the debate, but because she almost lost it, that was the one and only debate we had with Nicola. She doesn't even talk to anyone anymore, you know, unless they're in their wee cabal. So, this has got to change for the benefit of the people and the country of Scotland, and particularly for our women and girls.
Eva, we all remember the famous broom cupboard video made by Nicola Sturgeon back when a load of them left to go to the Greens because in their opinion, SNP was a transphobic party, and she pleaded with them to come back. But when she went out on this, after the decapitating placard, etc., and the pushback came also from England, a bit of pushback came, Nicola came out, but she couldn't turn around and condemn it. She had to say, both sides, they're all the same and it's terrible. And you should see, look what's happened to me. Look how terrible I've had this, I've had that, and the next thing. She just couldn't come right out and say, it's wrong. It's not the proper way to do it. Stop doing it. She's just not honest.
She had to make it about herself again instead of looking at the wider picture and her duties and obligations towards the people of this country. She was elected to take us to independence, and on a daily basis what we see, and we've seen this for donkey's years now, are continual distractions away from independence. The very fact that we're talking about the impact of the events of the last few weeks and months means that we're not talking about independence. We're not talking about how to address the cost of living crisis. We're not talking about education. We're not talking about the NHS. We're not talking about all the areas where her government is failing the people every single day. That's what we should be doing, is sitting right now in a constitutional convention talking about strategies to deliver that referendum that we were going to have in October. Yeah. What we ought not to be doing is arguing the pros and cons of whether a man can ever become a woman, and just how wrong it was for a rapist to be even contemplating being inside a Scottish women's prison in 2023, 200 years after Elizabeth, who recognised the need for single-sex spaces. Those continue to be eroded. The broom cupboard video might have helped to a few friends of Nicola a couple of years ago. There's nothing like that going to help her credibility with the women that she's surrendered now, because her prisons strategy, for which she and Keith Brown are responsible, not the Scottish Prison Service, and their attempts to pass the buck to the Scottish Prison Service have annoyed prison officers. The SPS management are annoyed about it. Prisoners are annoyed about it. The general public is furious about it. Internationally, we're a laughing stock. But when people know the far reach of these policies, it's even more chilling, because we know that female prisoners were the guinea pigs. We now know that there are transgender guidance policies for hospitals, which are written in almost exactly the same vocabulary as the prison policy, whereby the patient is entitled to ask to be accommodated in the ward of the gender into which they identify. And so if I, as a female, was in a female ward and I saw a male being accommodated there, if I complain, I'm the one who's in the wrong for not being tolerant and not accepting the man in that single-sex space, despite the fact that Nicola Sturgeon and Shona Robson, in previous guises as health and shadow health spokespersons or secretaries, promised single-sex wards. So we know that there are a lot of public agencies, including charities such as Rape Crisis and Women's Aid, who say that they've had a trans-inclusive policy for the last 15 years and there have been no incidents. Well, if they have had a trans-inclusive policy for the last 15 years, the women who've been affected by the accommodation of men within refuges ought to have known that and ought to have been told this is no longer a single-sex space. But women have gone along there understanding it to be such. So there's an awful lot more to come out. What is also disappointing is that I see that one of the spokespeople who was asked about this whole debacle this week actually commented that one of the reasons why she was troubled about a trans-identifying male rapist going to a women's prison was that, I quote, "This could have had an adverse impact on the other trans women in the female estate." You know, an outright acknowledgement that there remain other men within the female estate. So this is by no stretch of the imagination the end of the road. It's just the beginning. But what we need is sunlight every day until the public sees the bigger picture. And somebody else needs to take the reins and get the country towards an independence electoral event sooner rather than later and get the show back on the road.
I agree. But the good thing I'm thinking at the moment is that more and more people are actually getting to see this. And the fact that it went on to national news, about this guy, Adam Graham, getting into Cornwall Vale, more people go, what is that? What's this about? When they start understanding it, they're getting angry. Yvonne, a lot of people showed a lot of hope, and if they don't have a referendum in 2023, I'm leaving, and this is good that we've got Ian Blackford, this new guy, Stephen Flynn, maybe he's the broom that's going to clear the place up, and we'll get back onto independence. But he this week turned round and said, when he was talking about when they were having the debate on the GRRB bill down at Westminster, he wouldn't change a line, not a thing. He thought it was a perfect bill, and that Westminster had no right interfering with the Section 35. It's a different guy, it's a different face, it's the same shit. Am I right, wrong, or donut?
No, you're absolutely right. But I just want to go back to something that Phil said. He said, there's been absolutely no apology from Holyrood. Well, funnily enough, last week I went through to see if Nicola Sturgeon has ever apologised for anything. And she did. Last year, she apologised for the persecution of witches from the 16th to the 18th century, and she created this political stunt to apologise on behalf of witches, and then set about launching a witch hunt on the likes of Eva and I, calling us bigots and turfs, as she promoted this horrific gendered ideology that she's been pushing through, and she's surrounded by a cult of these GRR promoters. And the Green Party, the Scottish Green Party, I don't think that there's a single political researcher out there that isn't part of this GRR cult as well. And this idiocy is it's infected the ranks of the SNP to such an extent that the respected journalist Kevin McKenna just said it was really sinister, and he advised people to keep their children away from people in the SNP because of this cult thing that they're promoting. It's unbelievable, and people are getting very angry now that the tabloids have cottoned onto the likes of Beth Harris and her vile sexual menu of perverted services. Now that they're cottoning on to this double rapist and other rapists and male predators, the public is getting very, very angry. And I think we will see this reflected very soon in the forthcoming by-elections that are coming up. We've got the one in Aberdeen, and I would say Charlie. Yes, Charlie Abel, I would just say, don't get angry, get even, vote for Charlie. And if you don't live in his constituency, find a friend or a relative who does, and get on the phone to them and say, vote for Charlie. I suspect that the SNP now know that they're in serious trouble. But losing by-elections, these are going to be crucial over the next few weeks. And the best way to punish the SNP is punish them in the ballot box. And that isn't a euphemism.
As well. They would pay attention. Yes. Could I just say, for all the people who are running the campaign for Charlie, or any who live up there in the Aberdeen area, go out and help. But here's a wee hip to my old marketing tip. Enable able, I think, is a good slogan that we could be using. I know you're dying to get onto it, Phil, and you tried to jump the gun there because you're desperate to get into it. And I'm now going to open the floodgates for you. Hannah Burdell, a few days after the whole thing with the GRRB, they were all out there on the steps with the decapitate TERFs, etc. And they want to go to Strasbourg. Let's go to Strasbourg immediately and get the EU, the European Court to interfere, rather, and get this British government, because how dare they do this to our friends in the trans community? Of course, they didn't do it for independence. And can I just say before you answer that, Phil, I would just say, nah, ladies, please take this in the way it's being intended. They have changed, apart from all the other things they've done, is they've enabled a language of using cis and TERFs. Don't use it. You're helping them. You're women, adult human females. Stop using the term cis and TERFs. You're playing into their game. That's just a side issue. But Phil, they're anxious to fight this gender stuff, but they're not anxious to do the one job we gave them, get us independence, but they're wanting to do everything they can for gender ideology. It's just nonsense.
It is, and we're going over the same ground here, but it's true, and it's really frustrating, and it's destroying our whole campaigns, all of everything that was went before has been downgraded now, lost the impetus that Alex, we've said it many times, he gave Nicola a golden opportunity to write herself into the history books. And everyone here got behind Nicola. I was enthused. I thought it was a stroke of genius when Alex handed it over.
Yeah.
Because what happened was, you know, you remember Nicola stepped out from under the shadow of Alex, I think, when we challenged John Swinney about 7 years before. And she just clearly wasn't ready. So back in she went. She was tutored, mentored by the best that we've got. And then none of us saw it coming, as you do with much of Alex's strategy. And after that hollowness and that loss in 2014, after that magnificence that was the unification of so many peoples in Scotland, and who have now would be joined, if Nicola had kept that impetus going, we would be joined by many, and it would be a slam dunk. It wouldn't be even up for question. We should be independent by now if she'd followed on and did what she was supposed to do. But no, she didn't. She just did her own thing, went her own way, and ignored the will of the people of Scotland for her own glory. We know there are issues that Nicola can be sued for, that Nicola can be blackmailed for, and I believe she is. I believe she's been blackmailed on 3 points that I've mentioned before. And, you know, why can't we? I don't want to talk about it because there might be something personal there, and I believe there is. So I wouldn't do that to any human being. But Nicola, it's time you came clean and owned up and walked away from this. You need to walk away from this job, just as you've walked away from the principles that you stated were yours that allowed you to take this job. Because Alex suffered the slings and arrows. He went right up to the line on independence in 2014, and with all these arrows stuck in his armour, he just stepped aside, and Nicola come barging right through, punched right through. We all got behind her. The movement increased, the membership massively increased, and we thought this is it, and it should have been it. And you betrayed us, Nicola. You betrayed the people of Scotland and the core principle that put you where you are today, and you should be ashamed. You should not even walk away. She should be thrown out. She should be thrown out. She's not good enough. She's betrayed us, and I will never forgive her for it. I don't care how many apologies she gives, or she finally comes clean and starts telling the truth. Too late, Nicola. You have betrayed the people of Scotland to the cost of so many that have died and won't see independence, and the suffering, the continued suffering of our people that can only be alleviated through independence. You're responsible. And these shysters that won't stand up and fight GRRB and instead push independence, you all need to go as well. Now your tea's out, folks.
Yeah, there's a certain irony, Eva, that if she had stuck to the one job we gave her, and they all stuck to the one job, her GRRB bill would not have had a Section 35 in it. She could have pushed that through after if she had prioritised independence. And I would imagine if she had got us independence, she could have done anything. and the people of Scotland would have backed her. That is an irony, is it not?
I think what's most ironic about that actually is this, that if Scotland were already independent, what we would have had, because not only do ALBA as a party promote it, but so did the SNP, we'd have had a written constitution. It would have included women's rights. Those rights would have been sex-based rights, and that in that matter, sex would have been defined as biological sex. So somebody getting a GRC would not have been controversial. It would have been a minor administrative change because they would be changing their sex for certain purposes, not for all purposes. But what Nicola, in her gender representation on public boards court case, did was to instruct lawyers to argue that a GRC changes your sex for all purposes. And she could do that then because we're not independent, and the jobs that she's able to hand out to her backbenchers for them to become junior ministers, etc., depend on their loyalty towards her, not their loyalty to Scotland. So if Scotland was independent, I think we would have had an entirely different set of circumstances where there would have been biological sex rights in a written constitution. Women need not have feared any bogus application for a GRC because its impact would have been the minor administrative change that would enable some documents to be altered out of kindness. And by trying to do what she's done, she's ruined it for herself. She's cast doubt on our ability to run ourselves as a competent country. And she's managed, unfortunately, to alienate and to harm trans people as a consequence, because she's certainly done them no favours and caused a hell of a lot of unnecessary hurt, controversy and international embarrassment.
It is. Yvonne, independence, it won't get rid of all our problems overnight. Of course it won't. It'll make a hell of a difference. But I mean, this week, the Tories voted to allow the water companies in England and Wales another 15 years of dumping raw sewage into rivers and seas in and around England and Wales. Now, I don't know if you saw the video of, I think it was in Chichester, where there was literally jobbies floating along the water like a guy was in his canoe, and he photographed it. Now, people in Scotland have to realise, under the internal market bill, the Tories could decide tomorrow to sell our water company off. There's nothing Holyrood can do to stop. It's not just GRR bills that are at risk here. They could stop everything with a Section 35, for example. Student fees, they could reinstitute them next week because Section 35, because it's not what's happening in the rest of the UK. We need to get back on track, do we not, Yvonne?
Absolutely. I mean, all these issues have been derailed because of Sturgeon's fixation over getting her GRR bill through. And what I find most shocking is that some of her MSPs were boasting about how they had spent 7 years to get this bill through. 7 years for this nonsense, which has been swatted like a fly by those in Westminster. And it's outrageous that the SNP government has put us in this position where we are relying on the likes of the Tories in Westminster to knock these crazy bills on the head. But just imagine if the likes of Maggie Chapman and Shona Robertson had used the last 7 years on something productive, like protecting our waterways, protecting our energy. I don't think there's a single Scottish company that is running any of our energy companies at the moment. It's absolutely shocking. And to think that they have spent 7 whole years on this GRR. Everything goes back to the GRR. This is how they will be defined when they are finally booted out of office. And, I know a lot of Prism listeners will be saying, if only that would happen. I think we're getting very, very close to the end of Nicola Sturgeon's reign and that of her Sturgeonites. You're finished because of your bonkers policies and your neglect in Scotland's energy and your neglect in the wonderful resources this great nation has. You're finished. You really are finished. There's nothing you can do to protect your legacy at all. You know, they've signed their own death warrant, and I cannot wait until they have gone so that we can get on with the real business of getting independence and cutting free from those other losers in Westminster.
Hear, hear. And I agree with you. The clock's beating us again, but there's just a couple of things I'd like to run over you. I know your interest in global politics. And it's, I think, something viewers and everyone, we in Scotland sometimes are a bit too parochial and focused inward. And we've just spent our entire programme talking about a thing that is, we shouldn't be talking about. We should be talking about independence. I'd love to be talking about independence every week. And I go back to that guy last week. He said, "Oh, you need to talk." Let me. I desperately want to do it, but we also need to look at the global picture, Phil. Because what happens out in that big world is affecting Scotland. And there's two things that happened this week. Just a quick, because as I say, we're way over our time as usual. But it was the 78th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which is in Poland. I've been there. It's a hell of a thing. I can't describe it. It's not Disneyland, but if you get a chance to go, go. And it was liberated by the Russians, the Soviets. This year they had a commemorative service there, Phil. And the only people that weren't allowed to arrive were the Russians. They weren't allowed to join in. They were the people who had liberated Auschwitz, but they weren't allowed to talk because of this new hegemony of the US and NATO. It was appalling.
Yeah, that is discussed on 27th of January 1944, when the horrors of Auschwitz, the Soviet army, the Russians went in and they came through Auschwitz in Poland and Birkenau and Monowitz, I think. I can't remember the right pronunciation. But I too have been there, and it's the horror, the crimes against humanity that it's horrific. Horrific. And the Russians lost 27 million people, more than anybody else in the Second World War. And to remove and not invite those who actually freed us from Nazism, who did more than most, who suffered more than most, is appalling, absolutely shocking. It's a disgrace for what? For a proxy war that the West wants to fight against them. It's disgusting.
One of the ironic things, again, not nicely ironic, is that the majority of guards at Auschwitz were actually Ukrainians. There you go. Yeah, Ukrainian guards. The last thing I would like to take, because I know you're also a financial man, is in August this year, BRICS are meeting, which BRICS, for those of you who do not understand it, is Brazil, Russia, India, and China, and South Africa. It constitutes more than 50% of the world's population. They are bringing in a currency in August that's getting put in place to replace the dollar as the petrodollar and the pound. This is half the world's population because of what's happening. This is going to have profound effects in the whole of the world, is it not, Phil?
Yeah, it's a new global reserve currency that the BRICS are working on, predominantly China and Russia. We've touched on it before, but this is the 15th BRICS summit. Well, it'll be Durban in South Africa this time. And the foreign ministers, I mean, they first met in 2006 without South Africa. And later in 2011, South Africa joined. But the recent announcement was made by Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in a news conference with the Eritrean foreign minister, calling BRICS a manifestation of global multipolarity. And, you know, what you're talking about, just because they're strengthening locally their ties around, look what the Chinese are doing in Africa, the Russians are doing around the world. They're actually helping people where the West were supposed to promise and failed to deliver on our promises. Read people like Michael Hudson on this, very, very good. But BRICS is 5 countries, but there's 12 others showing an interest in joining and
Yep.
developing links, and we know who they are. And the clock is
Argentina is one of them.
yeah, but the clock is ticking, and the clock of multipolar history is ticking in the right direction, and that's a Lavrov quote since 2009. But if the 12 join, and most will, including Iran, Venezuela, and Saudi, BRICS currently, I think, is about 40% of the world's population. But not only will they be the majority of the world's population, they'll own 60% of the oil and gas in the world. Thus ends the dominance of the petrodollar. And the truth is out there, people. Listen to Michael Hudson for the inside line in that, or the grey zone in the Duran. So, yeah, the world's changing. It's going to rapidly affect us. And the other thing is this war in Ukraine, this proxy war. We're edging closer to nuclear warfare. If that happens, there's nothing to talk about. There's nobody to speak to. You don't exist. We need to pay more attention to these things as well. But no, the world is changing, and from a unipolar world after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the fall of the Soviet Union, America had its own way and it behaved as it did since then. But things are changing and very, very fast.
They are indeed, and folks, that's why we're discussing it and mentioning it, because it's going to affect us all throughout the world. Last thing, just before we go, I want to do a wee plug. I've been reminded that the Forth Valley Feminist Festival is on next Saturday, the 4th of February at Alloa. If you're available, be there. Our wonderful ladies, I am sure, are going to be there. Am I right?
I'll be there. I'm opening it, and then some of the speakers are very well known indeed. They include some of the prominent women in the Women Won't Beast movement, such as Susan Dalgetty and very many others. So visit Forth Valley Feminist Twitter account and you'll get a full list of speakers. There's speeches, entertainment, food, stalls, and most of all, great company from the Women Who Won't Beast.
And these two great ladies. Now, I'm going to go. One thing I've got to ask you all, ladies and gentlemen who are watching, I'm not going to, it's a long story. I'm a Luddite when it comes to technology. I've screwed up Facebook. Can all of you, with all the different pro-independent sites, please put Prism out on there? I can't this week. So I need you all to do that. Wherever you've got a Facebook account, get it out there. But until we see you next week from sunny downtown Dubai, from cold North Dakota, from the wonderful Clackmannanshire and the very beautiful Borders, we bid you good night and we'll see you next week. Until we do, take care.
Bye.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism.